Good morning. Today we're going to be finishing up our chapter 15, boom and bust. Let's remember our key terms from this chapter. We learned about stocks, being a share in an ownership that's bought and sold, so being able to own parts of the company, and you buy and sell on the stock market. A stock broker is the person you go through who actually does the buying and selling. Where is the stock market located? Who can tell me where the stock market for the United States is located? Chase? In New York.
Oh, yes.
So in New York City. The Great Depression is the 1930s economic crisis that began with the stock market crash in October of 1929. Remember, it dipped a little bit, just like everything goes down and comes up, goes down and comes up. People didn't realize it was going to come up, so they freaked out and panicked, and everybody sold their stock, and it crashed. Prohibition was happening at the same time between 1920 and 1933. That's when alcohol was illegal. It was illegal to make, transport, and sell alcohol. Did not stop people from making, selling, and transporting alcohol. They did it illegally. That's when the gangster era really came up. They made a lot of money from it. They had their speakeasies where they would go and still have their alcohol. So it did not have the effect that the people wanted it to have. It actually made crime bigger instead of less. Foreclosures during the farm crisis. The Roaring 20s was great for a lot of people, not for the farmers. So during the farm crisis, a lot of people were losing their property, and they were foreclosed on when the bank would take back the property because they couldn't keep up with their payments on it. Welfare really came about during the Great Depression because so many people needed help. So welfare is that aid in the form of money or necessities for people experiencing financial hardship. And to help get us out of the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt developed the New Deal. That was his platform that helped him get elected president. It was the reforms that he put into place, the policies to help improve the economy and public relief. So that is where we left off with the New Deal. So let's look at that chapter comprehension page. We've done the intro. We did the crash and Great Depression. We've done the Jazz Age during the Roaring 20s. We talked about Prohibition, the farm crisis and the farmers taking action, the job crisis after the great crash, the stock market crash. Then there were no jobs for anyone. Now we are at the New Deal. Brielle? I think we are just going to correct the chapter comprehension tomorrow. So make sure you have complete sentences and make sure it's complete. Yesterday I was telling us make sure you had through number 8 done. Today we're doing 9, 10, and 11. We will be correcting it tomorrow, and then we're going to move on. With art yesterday, it just got to be too much. All right, page 327, the New Deal. The New Deal was an experiment. No one really knew how to end the Great Depression. President Roosevelt and his advisors based their ideas on the progressive view that government could and should improve economic conditions for all Americans. They're not just going to sit back and say it'll fix itself. It was to the point where the government needed to step in and help boost the economy. Though the New Deal failed to end the Great Depression, it did provide work and welfare for the unemployed. The New Deal also greatly enlarged the federal government. For example, government began to regulate or make rules for banks and the stock market. Because remember, the banks, I said there was that big run on the banks, and people were withdrawing all their money and they didn't have enough cash on hand. They said that can't happen now because banks are federally insured. FDIC, you'll see with banks that they're FDIC. That means they're federally insured. So you know your money is safe and you'll be able to get your money back even if there's another crash. It also began programs that assisted farmers and unemployed workers. These programs were designed to increase the general well-being of the people. So while the New Deal didn't end the Great Depression, it lasted for the whole decade. It helped a lot of people, so it didn't get as bad as it could have gotten. Many Americans loved Roosevelt. Many others disliked him. We've seen that in today's world. Some people absolutely love one president, and other people absolutely dislike that president. So you really can't please everyone at the same time. Generally, public opinion divided along class lines. Those hit hardest by the Depression, especially farmers and laborers, helped elect him to a record 4 terms. It was after President Roosevelt that they came up with the amendment saying a president could only be president for 2 terms. But Roosevelt did so much for the country, so much for the people that were affected by the Depression, that people just kept electing him and electing him and electing him. And then people are like, okay, we've had him for 4 years. It's not 4 years, sorry, 4 terms. So 1 term is 4 years. So if they had him for 4 terms, that's 16 years. People have said, enough. We need to put a limit on this so this can't keep happening. The wealthy, including bankers and big business leaders, often accuse him of making government larger and more expensive. They believed the New Deal would hurt the American economic system. Today, people still debate about how involved government should be in their lives. And we see that all the time. People are saying, oh, you shouldn't put a limit on this. You shouldn't put a law for that. And other people are saying, no, we need these laws. So there's still that debate over how much the federal government should be involved. Let's look at page 328. After the crash, the New Deal. The New Deal sounded like good news to rural people such as the Tassos of Otter Tail County. By 1932, the Great Depression had driven prices for farm products lower than they had been even during the darkest days of the 1920s. So it got even worse than what it was like during the farm crisis. It looked like the state's farm economy was on the verge of collapse. Families throughout rural Minnesota were frightened. They hoped help would come soon. In 1933, a new federal agency called the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, the AAA, started a program to raise prices for farm goods. This would provide relief for farmers. President Roosevelt went on the radio to explain how the AAA would work. Now, this is not the same as AAA that you have for your car. Different organization. This was 100 years ago. So it's a different organization. They're not talking about AAA that you call up when you get a flat tire. Okay? So this is to help the farmers for agriculture. Many farmers, including Conrad and Elizabeth Tasso, were skeptical at first. He promised us that he was going to give everybody work, Conrad recalled. And of course that puzzled us. We wondered, how could he do that? The Tasso's questions were answered the following year when drought struck a large part of Minnesota, including Otter Tail County. Fields dried up from lack of rain. So not only was there not the demand for their food, people didn't have the money to buy it, now a drought hit and they didn't have water to grow the crops, so they were hit even harder. Farmers could not find enough feed to keep their dairy cows alive. Conrad Tasso, for example, resorted to feeding his cows Russian thistle, a plant that was hard for the animals to digest. Then the federal government stepped in. The AAA offered to buy any cattle that farmers in Otter Tail County could not afford to keep. The Tassos sold 6 of their 10 cows for $20 apiece. The money they received from this New Deal program helped them get through the summer. So the federal government stepped in and said, you have so many cows, but you can't afford to feed them. They're going to starve and die. We'll give you money for those cows, so that way you'll get something for them. So instead of the cows starving and dying and you have nothing, now at least you can get money for the cows and it can help feed you through the summer. More help on the way. In 1936, drought struck again. Another federal agency came to the rescue. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, provided money to put people to work. It paid for public projects such as repairing schools, improving roads, and building new ball fields. In Otter Tail County, drought-stricken farmers worked on WPA road projects and received livestock feed and crop seeds as payment. It was hard work hacking through brush to clear the way for new roads, but Conrad Towson was happy to do it. There were no jobs to get whatsoever, he recalled. It was the only thing you could do. So it was manual labor, it was very physical, and he did it because that was the only way he could get paid so he could keep his farm going. If he didn't do the hard jobs, he would do nothing and he would have nothing. So the government stepped in and made these jobs available so people could get something and they weren't going to lose their house, they weren't going to lose the farm, they weren't going to starve. The Indian New Deal. In the 1930s, the federal government passed laws that changed life on American Indian reservations. These 1934 laws came to be known as the Indian New Deal. The main reform was called the Indian Reorganization Act, the IRA. The IRA provided American Indian nations with the ability to control their own affairs more than they had for many years. It was intended to overturn previous U.S. government policies that had interfered with the sovereignty of American Indian nations. So the federal government was kind of backing out and letting them decide for themselves how to live. So the federal government was backing out and giving the American Indians their say on their reservations, which is what they always wanted. The IRA ended the policy of allotment, which had reduced the amount of land American Indians owned on their reservations. It also enabled tribes to create independent tribal governments to serve their people. These were overseen by an agency called the Bureau of Indian Affairs. American Indian nations had to vote to adopt this new tribal government plan. The law was not perfect. No law really ever is perfect. For example, it created a governmental structure that ignored traditional Indian leadership. So their tribes were typically run a certain way with the chiefs and the elders. So they weren't following the same system. So it was a little bit hard for them because they were putting in the more Americanized system of government, but at least they had their own say. Still, it was a change, and some American Indian nations agreed to it. Another part of the Indian New Deal was the Johnson-O'Malley Act. This law dealt with education. The Johnson-O'Malley Act, or JOM as it came to be known, gave public schools money to cover the cost of educating American Indian students rather than providing separate schools for them. Although these reforms were not perfect, many American Indians believed they were a step in the right direction and improvement over previous policies and laws. So even though it wasn't perfect, it was better than what they had. Of all the New Deal agencies, none was as popular in rural Minnesota as the Rural Electrification Administration, the REA. In the 1930s, most Minnesota farms had no electricity. Remember, this was 100 years ago, so they didn't have electricity the way that we do nowadays. The REA set out to change that. It encouraged farmers to join together to form cooperatives, associations that would help them set up electricity. Then the REA funneled money to these organized groups. This money was used to provide low-cost loans to farmers who wanted to bring electricity to their farms. The cooperatives bought electricity from existing power plants and then built power lines to carry that electricity to the farms. By 1939, about 800 farmers in Otter Tail County were enjoying the benefits of the REA, but Conrad and Elizabeth Tasso were not among them. We didn't have the cash to do it, recalled Conrad. I wanted it in the worst way. Rural electrification went slowly. Most Minnesota farms did not get electricity for another 10 or 15 years. Still, without the REA, getting electricity would have taken much longer. So people who had the money on hand were able to join a cooperative and able to get the electricity to their farm. Why do you think they wanted electricity at their farms?
To power the stuff that they need for like their food and stuff like that. Like
Okay. What kind of stuff do we use electricity for at our home?
more lights.
The lights. What else, Sam?
Like a fridge.
Like the fridge. So your food could last longer. What else, Ryan?
Outlets.
The outlets, so you could plug in a light. So you could plug in the radio. Colin? They did not have dishwashers yet. They still washed by hand. I know, the olden days. But those conveniences that really helped. It wasn't just a luxury. Having a refrigerator makes a huge difference. Their food stays good for days longer. Instead of sitting out on the table, they put it in the fridge and it won't spoil as quickly. So their food would last longer. And during a depression, you want your food to last as long as you can. So that electricity really helped. Having the lights so you could do stuff later in the day or earlier in the morning. You didn't have to wait for the sun. Helped. So all these things helped the farmers. And even though they might not have been able to join a cooperative right away, it was bringing that electricity to them sooner. Had they had no cooperatives, then it probably would have taken 20, 25 years to get the electricity out there. So at least even though they didn't join the cooperative right away, that electricity came to them sooner. The New Deal pumped more than $1 billion into Minnesota between 1933 and 1939. It put people to work, gave people hope, and propped up the economy. It also convinced many Minnesotans that government could and should play an active role in people's lives. Yet even with all these benefits, the New Deal did not end the Great Depression. Farm prices remained low, and millions of people were still out of work. It would take another world war to shake the United States and Minnesota out of their long economic nightmare. World War II is starting up. I believe it started in 1939 and it ended in 1945. So that war started, another world war started up. We're going to learn about that next chapter. And that's what helped get us out of the Depression, because a lot more jobs came about. Soldiers, the factories making stuff for the soldiers. So the soldiers going over to war, leaving their jobs, more jobs opened up. So all of those things helped get us out of the Great Depression. So the New Deal helped. It didn't get as bad as what it could have gotten, but it didn't pop us out of the Depression like it was hoped. The New Deal lives on. Many structures built by the WPA in Minnesota still exist today. Below is a short list of some of the better known examples from around the state. Have you ever seen one of these? Let's see. In Camden, there are water fountains and other structures at the Camden State Park that were built back in the 1930s. In Duluth, they have Wade Stadium. So the next time you go up to Duluth for a vacation, see if you can drive past Wade Stadium, and you'll know that it's almost 100 years old. In Grand Marais, there's the Harbor Seawall. In the Little Falls, there's a picnic shelter and other structures at the Charles A. Lindbergh State Park. In Menominee County, there's the Livestock Pavilion and other structures at the county fairgrounds. In Minneapolis, there's a sandbox and other structures at Minnehaha Park. So if you ever go to Minnehaha Falls, go to the park there and you'll see some stuff that's almost 100 years old. In Morrison County, there's the stone entrance walls at Camp Ripley. In Pipestone County, there's the Split Rock Bridge. In St. Cloud, there's the granite walls at St. Cloud State University Selke Field. My kids have played soccer there. I did not know that wall, it looks kind of like you're in a prison. Has anybody ever played soccer on those fields? Really? Wow, my kids have played there a bunch at Selke Field in St. Cloud. It's the soccer field. It's surrounded by this really high stone wall. And it feels like you're in a prison field because you've got this brick wall surrounding the fields. But it's not a prison. It was actually built during the Great Depression. Interesting. And it gave people money building that stone wall protecting the stadium. In St. Paul, there's Seal Island and other structures at Como Zoo. So if you go to Como Zoo this summer, look at Seal Island, and you'll know that that's almost 100 years old. You can impress your parents with some knowledge about Como Zoo. Scarlett, you were just there. If you go back, you can point out that you know that island where the seals swim around is almost 100 years old. So there's stuff that is still around today that they built back during the Great Depression. With that, we are going to, I'm going to give us a little bit of time to finish up our chapter comprehension. We will finish reading tomorrow that St. Paul's gangster area. So we're ending with something fun. But first, before we read about the gangster era, we are going to correct chapter comprehension. So that needs to be done in complete sentences for tomorrow. So right now, make sure your chapter comprehension is completely finished. We had numbers 9, 10, and 11 that we had left to finish today. So make sure you have your questions finished and make sure they're in complete sentences. Remember, this is taking place of the test. I'm actually going to put this in under the test scoring, so it's going to have a bigger weight to it than what the chapter comprehension normally has. And I'm not going to have us fix up ones we get wrong. We have plenty of time. We have our book. Make sure you're answering your questions correctly. We will not be turning these in to get partial credit redos. You have enough time to make sure you've done it correctly. With that, we will say goodbye to our friends at home. We hope you are well, and we hope to see you soon.